We're going to talk about the most interesting and funniest things we've heard or seen as educators or, teaching beginner sewers how to sew and, just the nuances of learning a new craft. You can take it away. Naima, you first.
I think the funniest for me is comparing like my kids to adults and seeing some of the same things that they do. One of the funniest stories I have actually is not even from a kid, and I'm not gonna say any name because I know she watches the podcast. But we were teaching at summer camp, and we had this thing on Thursdays where if the kids weren't finished their projects, we would be sewing fairies and kind of help their projects along. And my co-teacher sewed the pants for this student, but she sewed it wrong. So we were like, we're all tired. We're going to go home. She won't notice.
Right.
That baby came in that classroom the next day and said, what happened to my pants? And so to this day, every time we see each other, we joke about that story about what happened to the pants. So that's my starter story to say that it's not just students that it happens to. Sometimes educators have that problem too.
So, when I'm teaching sewing, I introduce the iron. And getting someone who has never ironed before. In a couple of the classes, there was one of the really factory irons with the steam, and it has the stuff at the bottom. So telling them this is how this iron works, and they're looking at you like, well, why is the steam coming out? Because it's the water coming down into the iron.
Wait, okay. These are college students or these are adults?
These were college students.
And they have never ironed anything before.
Never ironed anything. So I'm introducing them into iron.
And might I say, it's not just college students. I teach adults who do not iron. I've had several of my adult students say, oh my God, because of this class, I went and bought an iron.
Wait, they didn't even own an iron?
A lot of them do steam though. A lot of them steam, but I tell them you can't sew without an iron. You might as well just be sewing Barbie clothes by hand if you don't use an iron. And I tell them all the time, if you have to ask, the answer is yes, iron it. Iron everything. Our class slogan is the difference between handcrafted and homemade is your iron.
Yes, I mean that is half the battle because you can fix a lot of mistakes with a good iron, a good press.
I don't even like to say iron. I like to say press it.
Because ironing and pressing are two different things. See, ironing, you're trying to get the wrinkles out. Pressing is you pressing seams. You're putting pressure on the seam to make it flat
and making it permanent. Once you press it, you're making that seam permanent.
Yes, yes. And you want it to lay flat. So ironing is just getting the wrinkles out. And you can do the same thing with steam.
It was really mind-boggling to hear this student say, well, no, my parents or someone else were ironing for them, or they just would not.
I don't know if it's a generation thing, honestly, because my daughters, they don't like to iron either, but they know how to. I mean, who am I to let them walk out with wrinkled stuff?
And then even introducing them to, okay, so this is the tailor's ham. This is two sides of it.
Okay, for Letitia, for the people in the audience that don't know what a tailor's ham is, please explain.
You need a tailor's ham because it's just stuff, and one side is with cotton and the other side is wool. You use it to flatten out seams. Let's say a curved seam, a princess seam. You can use your tailor's ham to help you iron it. But introducing that, their students were just completely mind blown. Between that and also having to explain, hey, so this is a tape measure and a quarter an inch and what that looks like, and breaking it down to decimals and breaking it down to think of it as $1. 1 inch is $1. But really having to tell them, yeah, remember all of that math that you didn't think you need.
I tell them sewing is geometry. I've seen people sew one side on a quarter inch and one side on a half inch, and one side at the top is a quarter and the bottom is a half. And it's like, how are you going to wear that? Like somebody said to me today something about Gordon Gartrell. If you know, you know. It's funny when you see it in that sitcom, but it really happens like every day. This whole discussion came about because I was telling you guys about how one of my students, I teach beginner. So I'm teaching them how to read a pattern and what's on each piece, and she did it right. She was looking at the layout and looking at her piece, but she decided that a piece of her short should be cut on the fold. And I said, well, how are you going to say this? She was so frustrated, and she just couldn't figure it out, and I only get them once a week. So she was like, I'm just not going to touch it until Tuesday. So once I explained it, it was better. But it's something as simple explaining what the selvage and what the fold is. It's just because it comes so well, not naturally, but it comes from years of doing it for us. It's so interesting to see when the light bulb comes on when you're teaching.
The fold is where you fold the fabric in half, either on the long side or the short side. And the selvage is the edge of the fabric, the end of the fabric.
And can you explain that there are three selvage edges? There's a top, bottom, and side.
If you're going to sew your pant on the fold, that means that you have no hips. It's just going to go straight down. And you're going to sew the front and the back. You can't really do that because the crotch in the back and the crotch in the front is different.
I also had somebody sew their front crotch to the back crotch, which was kind of hilarious because they were like, well, why is it so big? And I tell them all the time, you have to mark your pieces, you have to mark your notches, you have to mark your circles. All of those things make sense when you are putting something together. But do they listen to me? No. And then they sew their back to their front.
No, I remember since you told a story about students not doing notches. You care to share that one?
In a class, we had someone come in to be the factory, and I told her, look at the tech packs. Here are their patterns. I want you to sew it. Here's the fabric. She met with them, discussed everything. I said, I want you to make the garment following their pattern. If there's no notch, then there's no knot. They're going to learn their lesson. Stuff will come back in pieces, literally. And I'm like, well, why didn't she put the waistband or put the pant leg to the pocket or to the other pant leg? Do you have a notch? Is there a notch there? And I go over and I look, and they're looking. They're like, no. And I'm like, well, how was she supposed to know that? You sent her your tech pack, and you sent her your pattern, and you gave her fabric. You literally wasted a whole day, and you paid her.
Yeah, you wasting time and money without having the proper indicators on your pattern.
They come to me all the time and wonder why it's not working. I'm like, where are your notches? I don't know what's the front. I don't know what's the back. I don't know which piece goes where. If you don't even put your circles, put your notches. They are your puzzle piece. You cannot put your pattern together without it. But they learn the hard way.
Then they come in, everything is big. And then even with teaching someone pattern making, I tell them I want a mechanical pencil. Do not use a regular number 2 pencil. So this is mechanical pencil. See how lovely this is? Here's your number 2 pencil. And this is the point. See the difference, the width of it? This is 13. This a quarter of an inch. You can have 16 lines in it, and now you've added over 2 inches on something. They're like, why is it big? Well, let's say you use a mechanical pencil, and you should have used you used a regular pencil. You should have used a mechanical one. You made your pattern wider because your lines are so thick. You went to the outer edge. That's adding measurement. So think of it as a quarter plus a quarter plus a quarter plus a quarter plus times 16.
When you have to stop and sharpen that pencil, it changes the width of the pencil every time you have to sharpen it. But they waste a lot of time and energy.
That's exactly why math matters.
I just had somebody ask me, what does 3/4 to 5/8 of an inch of a yard mean?
What does it mean?
Yeah, because their fabric measurements was bring 3/4 to 5/8 of a yard of fabric to class on the first day. Now this is not beginner. So, well, I don't know what that means.
I have a fraction to decimal chart that I think I'm going to include in the download. So, look in the description just so that you have it.
It's interesting having to explain and then kind of break it down to this is why where I'm telling you this because later on it's going to come up. Wait, hey, you wanted to do that princess seam dress. Well, it said 5/8 of an inch for the seam allowance. You did a quarter.
And I mean, it's not only bigger, it doesn't fit correctly because you did not sew all of the seam allowance. So the seams won't match up properly. That's when notches come in. So you have to line up the notches and the seam allowance doesn't add up. So you really have to, I mean, I know, Naomi, you said that in the beginning, you're teaching people how to read patterns. I mean, on the pattern, it says what the seam allowance is.
The funniest was in teaching somebody how to read a pattern. Now, she was cutting out some piece that needed to be cut on the fold, and she said, "Well, why can't I just cut it and to two and sew it together?" And I said, "Because it's going to change the shape." But I mean, even if I added an inch, I said, "How do you know it's an inch?" And she said, "Well, I, I I just think I can do it that way." And I said, "Godspeed. You do it however you see fit." And she came back the next week and she asked me again. I just don't understand why I can't cut two of them. I said, "My answer is not going to change because you want to save a scrap of fabric." She cut it. She did not cut it on the fold, and it didn't fit. And she didn't come back to class after that.
Really? She quit? I just want to say something just because, I mean, we're going over this. This is all in fun, right? Don't quit. Keep trying. I mean, listen, all of us made mistakes. Sometimes you sold the wrong piece of the wrong. It's all of us have done it.
We like to be transparent on this show. I was making something the other day. It was late. I was tired. When I looked at what I did the next day, I had sewn on, it was three different things. I had sewn every single one of them wrong side to right side, three times in a row. And I was like, this is why you don't sew when you're tired. All the years of experience we have, we still make these silly little mistakes. We still all carry a seam ripper everywhere we go, you know.
This is the first thing that I tell the students. Open your supplies. Your seam ripper is your best friend.
So that's it for us. I'm going to have the fraction to decimal download underneath this video and in the show notes if you want to download that. I am Zahia from Cover Me Chic, along with
Letitia of Keeping You in Stitches.
Fearless threads.
we'll see you next time.